This
At
route is completely
2:13 in
blocked.
the
We need
morning,
an alternate
the
now.
dispatch floor of
I'm
North
trying to
Star
reroute,
Med
but the
Route
system is
looked
slow.
the way it
Get me
always
regional
did during a
command. We're
major
losing
storm.
patience.
Every
That
screen
Amber
lit.
Alert needs
Every
immediate
coordinator
attention.
hunched
Reroute
forward,
traffic
coffee
through Sector
going
4
cold in
and
paper
get me an
cups.
update on the
Nobody
downed
had
lines
time
in
to
the red
drink.
zone.
Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago was disappearing under the kind of snow that swallowed sound. Then the map went dark. Not a
The
flicker.
display just went
Not
blank.
a single route, dropping off the grid
I see that.
one by one.
What's going
All of
on?
it. 63 active transports across 11 states vanished from the coordination board simultaneously, as if someone had reached into the system and pulled the plug on every beating heart inside
We just
it.
lost the entire
Derek
national
Webb,
grid.
the night shift floor supervisor, stood up from his chair
Status
so
check.
fast it rolled
What is the
back and hit
situation?
the cubicle wall behind him. What just happened? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Somewhere in a refrigerated transport van crossing the Iowa border, a harvested heart was 6 hours from non-viability. Somewhere in a dispatch cooler in Cincinnati, 4 units
is
of
going on with
O-negative
these
blood
screens?
sat waiting for routing confirmation
Talk
that
to
would
me.
never come.
I demand an
Somewhere in a
explanation
neonatal
right now.
unit in Detroit, a pharmacist was already on the phone asking where the antibiotic
just
shipment
happened?
was. The countdown on the heart had dropped below 3 hours by the time the board
Someone
went dark.
needs to tell me
Diana
exactly
Reeves
what happened
learned about
here.
it the way she learned about most crises, from a phone call that came before she had finished her first cup of coffee, except this time it was 2 in the morning and she had not been to sleep yet. She was still at her desk on the 46th floor, working through a quarterly review her father had started and never finished, when her cell phone lit up with Derek Webb's name. She listened, without interrupting. That was something her father had taught her. Let the person delivering bad news say all of it before you speak, because the part they hesitate before is always the part that matters most. Derek hesitated before he said the word simultaneous. Diana was already reaching for her jacket before he finished the sentence. The dispatch floor was 2 elevators and a keycard access door away. By the time she pushed through it, her coordinators had the look of people who understood exactly how bad things were and were moving anyway, which was the only correct response. She pulled up the error log herself, standing at the main terminal with her reading glasses still in her hand instead of on her face, squinting at lines of system output that told her the routing priority engine had not crashed. It had cleared itself. Every emergency designation, every time-sensitive flag, every override that kept a heart transplant ahead of a routine pharmaceutical shipment, gone. Reset to default. As if the system had simply decided, in the middle of a blizzard, that nothing was urgent. "Get me a manual override," Diana said. "We tried," Derek said. "The override interface is throwing authentication errors. Someone changed the access credentials." When? We don't know. It looks like it happened in layers, over the past 72 hours. Whoever did this planned it. Diana looked at the clock on the wall. She looked at the board. She did the math that nobody in the room wanted to do out loud. How many transports? How many hours? How many patients at the end of those routes who were running out of time faster than her team could think? Then, at 2:47, the board came back. Not gradually. All at once, the same way it had gone dark. Every route reappeared. Every priority flag restored. Every transport rerouted around the storm corridors with a precision that her own system had not been capable of 30 minutes earlier. The heart in Iowa was rerouted through a cleared highway corridor Diana had not known was available. The blood in Cincinnati had a confirmed delivery window. Detroit had an estimated time of arrival. The floor went very quiet. Diana stared at the board for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "Who did that?" Derek was already at the terminal. "I don't know. The patch came from inside the building, Workstation 7, second floor break room. The login credentials are from a deactivated account." He paused. "Whoever it was, they covered their tracks. Almost everything is wiped." Another pause, longer this time, almost. He turned the monitor toward her. There was a single line of code left behind, not an accident. Diana could see that immediately. It was too clean, too deliberately placed in a section of the patch that would survive a routine system flush. A comment string, the kind developers used to leave notes for themselves. This one contained 3 words and a file reference number. See the record. The file reference traced to a patent dispute database. The dispute was 8 years old, filed out of a technology acquisition in Boston. The acquiring party, North Star Medroute, under the leadership of its founder and then chief executive officer, Gerald Reeves. Diana stood very still. "I want to know who was in that break room tonight," she said. "Pull the building access logs." The building access logs told her almost nothing useful. Workstation 7 had been used between 1:42 and 2:47 in the morning. The key card swipe for the second-floor break room at 1:39 belonged to employee badge number 441. Badge 441 was assigned to Elijah Cross, night custodial staff, hired 14 months ago. Diana looked at the name for a moment. She had never heard it before. She pulled up his employee file and found what she expected to find in a file like his: a photo of a man in his early 40s with a quiet face, an address on the south side, an emergency contact listed as Zoe Cross, daughter, and a work history that showed consistent, satisfactory performance reviews and no disciplinary incidents. What she did not expect was the gap, 7 years, starting precisely when the Boston patent dispute had been filed and settled, during which Elijah Cross appeared to have existed nowhere that left a professional record. She closed the file. The patch was holding, for now, but Derek had already warned her. The code was written as a temporary fix. Without someone who understood the underlying architecture, really understood it, not just the surface layer her current engineers had been working with, the system would fail again. He estimated 7 days, maybe less if traffic volume spiked. 7 days to find whoever had written this. 7 days before 63 transports went dark again, and next time, there might not be an anonymous patch waiting to catch them. Diana booked a flight to Boston for 6 in the morning. She had to be back in Chicago by day 5 at the latest. That left her 4 days to find the truth and 2 days of margin before the system failed again. 3 floors below, in the corridor outside the executive suite, Elijah Cross was finishing his shift. He moved the way he always moved at this hour, methodically, without hurry, the industrial mop leaving even stripes on the marble floor that nobody would notice by morning. He had been doing this for 14 months. He knew which offices left their lights on and which went dark by 9. He knew which executive assistants worked late and which ones left early and hoped nobody noticed. He knew the precise weight of the silence on the 46th floor after midnight. When the building held its breath, he did not know that Diana Reeves had just spent 20 minutes staring at his employee file. He finished the corridor, returned the mop to the cart, and checked his phone. One new message from a number he did not recognize, which turned out to be an automated reminder from Zoe's school about a science fair project due at the end of the month. He stood in the elevator on the way down and read it twice, his face doing something that was almost a smile. Zoe's project was a robotic arm she had been building from salvaged components for 3 months. She had asked him, 2 nights ago, whether he thought the wrist joint would hold under load. He had looked at her design for a long time, longer than a janitor ought to need, and then told her to reinforce the pivot point and redistribute the weight bearing toward the elbow. She had looked at him with that particular expression she had, the one that asked a question she did not put into words. He had not answered it. The night before the crisis, she had asked him something else, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor surrounded by components. Not looking up from the wrist joint, she was carefully resetting. "Dad, if you knew how to fix something broken that nobody else could see, would you fix it?" He had stood in the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder for a long moment. "Go to sleep," he had said, finally. "It's a school night." But the question had followed him through the rest of his shift, down every corridor, into every silent office he moved through in the dark. He stepped out into the parking garage, turned his collar up against the cold, and walked to his car. The city was still half buried in snow. His shift ended at 3. He would be home by 3:30, sleep 4 hours, and be up by 7:30 to make breakfast before Zoe's school bus came. In the elevator on the way down, just before the doors opened on the garage level, he paused for one moment, with his hand resting against the wall of the car, not holding on, just resting there, and let himself feel the weight of what he had decided. He had left one thread, just one, not because he wanted to be found, because the system would fail again, and the next time it failed, it would not be during a blizzard, with a floor supervisor sharp enough to notice the board going dark. It would be on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, and someone would be too late, and nobody would know why. He had left the thread for the system. Not for himself. He got in his car and drove home through the empty snow-covered streets, past the closed storefronts and the orange pools of streetlight, thinking about whether he had enough eggs for breakfast. The patent dispute office of Aldrich and Voss occupied the third floor of a narrow brick building 2 blocks from Faneuil Hall, the kind of office that smelled like old paper and institutional coffee and had not updated its waiting room furniture since the early 2000s. Professor Warren Aldrich met Diana at 9 in the morning without warmth and without pretense. He was 71 years old, with the specific bluntness of a man who had spent decades watching other people take credit for things he had helped build, and he had agreed to meet her only because she had used the file reference number in her email and he wanted to know where she had found it. "You're Gerald Reeves's daughter," he said, before she had finished introducing herself. "I'm North Star's chief executive officer," Diana said. He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt. Then he gestured at the chair across from his desk and told her what he knew. The algorithm at the core of North Star's routing engine had not been developed in-house. It had been built by a 3-person team that Aldrich had supervised through an independent research contract, a contract that the acquiring company had purchased along with everything else when the deal closed. 2 of the 3 engineers had been absorbed into the new organization and given titles and stock options. The 3rd had not. "Why not?" Diana asked. "Because 6 weeks before the acquisition closed, he submitted a formal safety report identifying a flaw in the priority routing logic. A flaw that, if left unaddressed, would cause the system to periodically reset all emergency designations under high-load conditions." Aldrich folded his hands on the desk. The acquiring company's legal team determined that acknowledging the report would delay the deal, so they didn't acknowledge it. Diana kept her face very still. "And the engineer? He was removed from the project. The report was classified as internal correspondence and sealed under the acquisition agreement." Aldrich paused. "The flaw he identified was real. I reviewed his analysis myself. He was correct about everything." "What was his name?" Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. "You already know his name," he said. "That's why you're here." Diana did not confirm or deny it. She asked one more question. Was there documentation? The original report, the legal correspondence, the decision to seal it. "There was," Aldrich said. "Whether any of it still exists in a form you can access is a different question." He paused again. "I kept copies of everything I was party to. I kept them because I was not confident, at the time, that the right thing would happen. I am still not confident. But I have been waiting for someone to come and ask." He opened his desk drawer. Diana read on the plane to Phoenix. She read carefully, the way she had learned to read contracts and filings, not looking for what the document said, but for what it was trying not to say. The original safety report was 43 pages. It was precise, methodical, and written in the particular style of someone who had learned to document everything because he had already learned what happened when there was no documentation. The flaw it described was exactly what had happened 2 nights ago in Chicago, a cascade reset under peak load conditions, triggered by a conflict between the priority engine and the weather routing module. He had named it. He had described the failure condition in detail. He had proposed 3 separate remediation paths, with estimated implementation timelines and resource requirements. He had submitted it through every proper channel. And then, on page 44 of the sealed legal correspondence, Diana found the memo. It was written by North Star's then general counsel and addressed to her father. It was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph summarized the engineer's report and confirmed that the legal team had reviewed it and found the technical assessment credible. The second paragraph recommended proceeding with the acquisition on schedule and managing the report as a confidential internal document, noting that disclosure would likely trigger regulatory review and delay closing by a minimum of 4 months. At the bottom of the memo, in her father's handwriting, were 2 words: "Proceed accordingly." Diana folded the document and put it face down on the tray table. She looked out the window at the clouds below the plane for a long time. The flight attendant came by and asked if she wanted anything. Diana said no, thank you, without looking away from the window. She had been telling herself, since Boston, that there would be an explanation. that her father had been misled, or that the memo was out of context, or that someone else had signed his name. She had been holding that possibility carefully, like something fragile, because without it, certain things about her own life became very difficult to look at directly. Proceed accordingly. 2 words, his handwriting. No ambiguity. She picked the document back up and kept reading. Devin Marsh worked out of a converted warehouse space in Scottsdale that he used as a private engineering consultancy. He was 44, compact and precise, with the kind of careful economy of movement that Diana associated with people who had worked in high-stakes environments long enough to stop wasting energy on anything unnecessary. He had worked alongside the engineer for 8 months on a separate routing project for a regional airline before the acquisition closed. He had not been asked to sign anything. He had simply been in the room for enough of it to understand what had happened. He tried to do it the right way, Devin said. They were sitting at a workbench covered in circuit boards that Devin had pushed to one side without ceremony. He documented everything. He went through proper channels. He was careful and professional and completely correct, technically. He picked up a small component and turned it over in his fingers. And then the company's lawyers buried the report and wrote a new one that said the flaw was minor and had been introduced by his team's work, not discovered by him. Introduced by him. There's a difference, Diana said. There's an enormous difference, Devin said. One version makes him a whistleblower, the other makes him a liability. He set the component down. He was given a choice: sign the non-disclosure agreement and walk away with a modest settlement, or refuse and be named in a negligence filing that would have followed him permanently. He looked at Diana directly. He had a daughter. She was 4 years old. He signed. Diana thought about the employee file she had pulled 2 days ago. The 7-year gap, the South Side address, the emergency contact listed as Zoe Cross, daughter. Where did he go? She asked, after he signed. I lost track of him for a few years, Devin said. I heard he lost a custody dispute. His former wife's legal team used the negligence allegation, even though it was never formally filed, even though it was false. He paused. I heard he got his daughter back eventually. I don't know the details. Diana stood up. She thanked him. She was already calculating flight times to Portland. At the door, Devin said, Miss Reeves. She turned. He was the best systems architect I ever worked with. I want you to know that, because I think you are about to find out a lot of things about what happened to him, and I want that fact to be in the room when you do. The Portland records were held in a storage facility attached to a law firm that had represented the acquiring company during the original transaction and had since dissolved. The filing clerk, a young woman who seemed genuinely bewildered that anyone had requested access to an 8-year-old acquisition archive, showed Diana to a small room with a folding table and 3 banker's boxes and left her alone. Diana found the complete file in the second box. Everything was there: the original safety report, the sealed legal correspondence, the non-disclosure agreement, the settlement terms, the internal communications between her father's office and the legal team over the 6 weeks between the report and the closing date, and at the back of the file, a single sheet of paper that was not a legal document. It was a handwritten note on North Star letterhead, in her father's hand, addressed to no one. Diana read it twice. It was not an explanation. It was not an apology. It was a list of 3 things her father had intended to do. Review the flagged issue after closing. Ensure the engineer received proper attribution. Revisit the settlement terms within 2 years. None of the 3 things had happened. She knew that with certainty, because she had been his executive assistant for his last 3 years, and none of these items had ever appeared on any agenda she had prepared. She sat in the folding chair in the small filing room for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she looked at her watch when she sat down and again when she stood up, and she needed to know exactly how long she had allowed herself to stay still before she had to decide what to do next. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Malcolm Draper. She had known Malcolm Draper since she was a child. He had been her father's closest board ally, the man who had seconded every major motion, attended every company anniversary dinner, sent flowers when Gerald Reeves died. She had always understood, without quite articulating it, that his loyalty had been to the institution her father built. which was not quite the same thing as loyalty to her. She called him back on the way to the airport. "I know where you've been," Malcolm said, without greeting. His voice had the measured quality of a man delivering a prepared statement. She understood then that he had been monitoring her travel through the company's executive travel management account, the same system that booked her flights and charged them to North Star's corporate card. He had been watching her route from the moment she left Chicago. "I know what you think you've found. I want you to hear something before you do anything with it." A pause. "Your father made a decision under significant time pressure with incomplete information about the downstream consequences. That is not the same as wrongdoing. What you're holding is a legal liability for the company, not a moral indictment of a good man." "He knew about the flaw," Diana said. "He proceeded anyway. He made a business decision. Every chief executive makes them." Another pause. "Diana, I have a proposal that protects the company, honors your father's legacy, and ensures the system gets fixed. The engineer gets compensated quietly and generously. We attribute the patch to an external consultant. No public disclosure, no regulatory filing." His voice shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something warmer and more dangerous. "All you have to do is stop digging." Diana said nothing. "I have the votes to remove you on a temporary basis if you force my hand," Malcolm said. "You know that. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, not a threat." A final pause. "Think about what your father built. Think about whether you want to be the one who tears it down." Diana ended the call. She sat in the back of the rideshare to the airport and looked out the window at the Portland streets and said nothing for the entire 30-minute drive. She thought about proceed accordingly. She thought about a 4-year-old girl. She landed in Chicago at 11:40 in the evening, day 4. She had used every hour of the margin she had allowed herself, and she had not slept more than 3 hours in any single stretch since she had left. The building was quiet when she badged through the lobby. She took the elevator to the 46th floor and walked the length of the dark corridor toward the server room at the far end, the room that required a separate keycard and that her engineering team had been locked out of since the credentials changed. The door was already open. The light inside was on. Elijah Cross was standing in front of the main control panel, his back to the door, one hand on the keyboard and the other on the panel housing. He was wearing his North Star custodial uniform, the gray shirt with the building services logo on the left chest, and he was working with the focused, unhurried precision of someone who had been in this room 1,000 times, in his mind, before he ever stood in it physically. He heard her. She knew he heard her because his shoulders changed, not a flinch, something more subtle, a slight settling, as if he had been waiting for this and had decided, some time ago, how he was going to handle it. He did not turn around. Diana stepped into the room. "Elijah Cross," she said. A pause. "I work building services." His voice was even, "You also designed this system." He turned then. He was taller than his employee photo had suggested, and his face had the particular stillness of someone who had learned to be very careful about what he let show. He looked at her for a moment, not warily, more like he was taking an accurate reading of something. "The patch is degrading faster than I projected," he said. "I needed to activate the emergency priority protocol before the system rerouted the cardiac transport in Bay 7 to a standard corridor." "How long have you been monitoring the system?" "Since the night I patched it." Diana looked at the board. Bay 7 was green. She looked back at him. "I've been to Boston, Phoenix, Portland." Something moved in his face, very briefly. "Then you know. I know what my father did. I know what was done to you." She paused. "I need you to fix this system permanently." Elijah was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, not anger exactly, something older and more settled than anger. "I will fix it. When the full record goes to the Federal Oversight Office, not after, before." He looked at her directly. "I am not doing this anonymously again." The words landed in the room and stayed there. Before Diana could respond, the corridor outside filled with light and sound, 2 building security guards and, behind them, Malcolm Draper in a dark overcoat, his face arranged into an expression of measured regret. "Mr. Cross," Malcolm said, stepping into the room, You are currently in a secured facility using access credentials that were not assigned to you. That constitutes unauthorized access to a critical infrastructure system. He looked at Diana. And you no longer have the authority to authorize his presence here. Effective, as of 1 hour ago, the board has invoked the emergency governance clause. Your executive access is suspended, pending review. The guards moved toward Elijah. Diana said, Malcolm. 28 transports are currently flagged as delayed, Malcolm said, his voice carrying a quality of genuine sorrow that she recognized as performance. Our internal engineering team will manage the situation. Mr. Cross will be processed through proper legal channels. He looked at her one more time. I'm sorry it came to this. I genuinely am. Elijah did not resist. He looked at Diana once, briefly, as the guards moved him toward the door, not asking for anything, not accusing her of anything, just looking, the way someone looks when they have already accounted for this possibility and decided it does not change what they know to be true. And in the single second before he turned away, she saw something else cross his face, something that had nothing to do with her or the system or the board. A quick, involuntary calculation. Who was going to pick up Zoe in the morning? Then he was gone. Diana stood alone in the server room. On the board behind her, 28 transport icons glowed amber, waiting. Malcolm left her the statement on the conference table outside the server room. It was a single page, printed on North Star letterhead, with a signature line at the bottom and her name already typed beneath it. She picked it up and read it standing, in the corridor, under the fluorescent lights. It took her 40 seconds. The statement described Elijah Cross as a former contractor with a documented history of system interference, who had used a period of employment as custodial staff to gain unauthorized access to North Star's core infrastructure and introduce malicious code designed to create the appearance of a system failure. It described his subsequent patch as a coercive mechanism intended to extort the company into reopening a settled legal dispute. It described Diana Reeves as having acted in good faith in pursuing what she believed to be a legitimate lead before the full picture became clear. It was, she thought, very well written. Every sentence was technically defensible. Every sentence was a lie. At the bottom, below her signature line, in small print, upon execution of this statement, the board will restore full executive authority to Diana Reeves, effective immediately. Internal engineering resources will be deployed to address system stability on an ongoing basis. She set the page back down on the table. She thought about her father's handwriting. Proceed accordingly. She thought about Devin Marsh's voice in the Scottsdale warehouse. He had a daughter. She was 4 years old. She thought about Elijah Cross, that last involuntary calculation crossing his face as the guards walked him out. She picked up her phone. She called 3 numbers in the following order. The first was the direct line for the Federal Aviation and Medical Transport Oversight Division's night duty officer, a number she had memorized 2 years ago during a regulatory audit and never expected to use at midnight on a Wednesday. She told the duty officer she had documentation of a concealed safety report pertaining to a critical infrastructure system currently experiencing active instability and that she needed to initiate an emergency disclosure filing. The duty officer asked if she understood the implications. She said she did. The second number was Mitchell Carey at the Chicago Tribune, an investigative reporter she had met twice at industry events and whose card she had kept in her wallet without being entirely sure why. He answered on the third ring, awake and alert in a way that suggested he was always awake and alert. She told him she had a complete document record and was prepared to go on the record. He asked how soon she could send the files. She was already opening her email. The third number was Malcolm Draper. He answered immediately, Diana. His voice carried a careful neutrality. I've initiated an emergency disclosure filing with federal oversight, she said. I've also contacted the Tribune. The full record is going to them tonight. A silence, longer than she expected. Then, you understand what this means for the company? Yes. You understand what this means for your father's name? Yes. Diana. His voice shifted into something that might, under other circumstances, have been genuine. I've known you since you were 9 years old. I knew your father for 30 years. This is not what he would have wanted. I know, she said. He wrote that down, too. She ended the call. She stood alone in the empty corridor for a moment, the statement still on the conference table beside her, unsigned. The building was silent around her. She thought about the list her father had written on North Star letterhead, the 3 things he had intended to do and never done. She thought about the pale, careful handwriting of a man who had understood, somewhere in himself, that something had gone wrong, and had written it down, and then had put it in a file and closed the drawer. She did not cry. She picked up her phone and sent the files. The emergency disclosure triggered an automatic legal hold on North Star's board actions from the preceding 48 hours. By 2:15 in the morning, the detention order on Elijah Cross had been suspended pending federal review. Diana knew this because the duty officer called her back to confirm it, and because 20 minutes later her phone showed a text from an unknown number that said only, "Server room." Now. She went. Elijah was already there, standing where she had found him 2 hours before, looking at the board. The amber transport icons were still waiting. He did not turn around when she came in. "You didn't have to do it tonight," he said. "You could have waited until morning, talked to a lawyer first." "I know," Diana said. "It would have been smarter to wait. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her, the same careful, accurate look as before, but something in it had shifted slightly. Not softened exactly, more like recalibrated. "I need to tell you something before I sit down at that terminal," he said. "Not because I need you to respond to it, just because it should be said out loud. In a room, by a person." He paused. "I spent 6 years being careful, staying small, making sure Zoe had a stable life and that nothing I did could be used against her. I watched this system run on a flaw I identified, and I told myself it was not my responsibility anymore, that I had paid enough." He looked at the board. "2 nights ago, I made a choice, and I want you to understand that choice was mine, not yours, not your company's, mine." He looked back at her. "So whatever happens next, that part is settled." Diana stood in the doorway for a moment. Then, she said, "I cannot give you back what my father took." "No," Elijah said. "But you did not have to walk into a federal disclosure process at midnight to protect someone you met 4 hours ago." He paused. "That part is also settled." He sat down at the terminal. The work took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Diana stayed. She did not pretend to understand what he was doing at a technical level, though she followed enough of it to recognize the architecture, the structural logic of a system designed, at its foundation, by someone who had thought carefully, not just about how it would function under normal conditions, but about what it would need to survive the conditions that nobody planned for. At one point, roughly 40 minutes in, Elijah stopped typing. He looked at the screen for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "The commercial routing network and the medical priority network are running on the same load-bearing infrastructure. To stabilize the priority system permanently, I have to separate them. That means taking the commercial network offline." He turned and looked at her. "I want you to understand what that means before I do it. Commercial contracts represent approximately 63% of current revenue. Some of those contracts have penalty clauses for unscheduled downtime. The company will lose most of them." Diana looked at the amber icons on the board. 28 transports. Somewhere at the end of each one of those routes, someone was waiting. "Do it," she said. Elijah held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned back to the terminal. The commercial network went dark at 4:51 in the morning. The medical priority network came fully online at 4:53. One by one, the amber transport icons on the board shifted to green, not all at once this time, but individually, each one a separate small confirmation that a route had been established, a window had been secured, a vehicle was moving. The cardiac transport in Bay 7 received a confirmed corridor at 4:56. The delivery window for the O-negative blood in Cincinnati closed at 5:20 with the shipment en route. By 6 in the morning, every critical transport on the board was moving. Elijah leaned back from the terminal. He did not look triumphant. He looked like someone who had finished a piece of work that needed doing and was now very tired. Diana looked at the board for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "What do you need?" He thought about this seriously. The way she was beginning to understand he thought about most things. 3 things, he said. An independent safety review board with no North Star board appointments. Whistleblower protections written into the operating charter, not just policy, because charter language is harder to quietly revise. And a technical training pipeline for staff without formal credentials. He paused, not charity. A real pipeline, with certification pathways. Done, Diana said. All three. He nodded once. Then, he stood, picked up his building services jacket from the back of the chair, and put it on. The motion was so ordinary, so completely continuous with who he had been when she first walked into this room and found him working in a gray uniform, that it took her a moment to process it. "You're leaving?" she said. "I need to be home by 7, he said. "Zoe has school." The Tribune story ran at 6 in the morning, time to the opening of the Eastern markets. North Star's stock dropped sharply before trading was suspended for review. Malcolm Draper retained criminal defense counsel before noon. The Federal Oversight Division issued a formal request for all documentation related to the original acquisition, and 3 members of the board announced their resignation by the end of the business day. Diana testified before the oversight panel 10 days later. She did not bring a lawyer. She brought the complete document record, every page from the 3 bankers' boxes in Portland, the memo from Aldrich's drawer, the sealed correspondence, her father's handwritten list of things he had intended to do. She answered every question without qualification. When they asked her about Gerald Reeves's role, she answered those questions too. The name was removed from the building's exterior the following month. It was a gray February morning when they took it down, a small crew with a truck and a scaffold, the kind of job that took about 40 minutes and left a pale rectangle on the stone facade where the letters had been. Diana watched from the sidewalk. She had not planned to be there. She had been walking to a meeting 2 blocks away and had stopped when she saw the truck. She stood on the sidewalk until it was finished, and then she kept walking. She did not cry. She had done that privately, once, in her apartment the night she sent the files to the Tribune, and she had allowed herself exactly as long as she needed, and then she had stopped and made coffee and called her mother and told her everything. Her mother had been quiet for a long time and then said, "I think I always knew something like this was there." Diana had not known what to do with that, so she had simply said, "I know," and they had stayed on the phone together without speaking for a few more minutes before saying goodnight. 6 months later, North Star MedRoute formally reorganized as the North Star Medical Coordination Network, a nonprofit operating under a new charter with a restructured board that included 2 independent patient safety advocates and 1 representative from the company's non-executive staff. Diana retained a position as Director of Operations, reporting to the board. She did not have a private office. She worked at a desk in the open bullpen with the coordinators and seemed, from all available evidence, to prefer it. Elijah Cross joined the organization as Chief Systems Architect, with a contract that specified a 40-hour workweek, flexible scheduling, and a clause, negotiated by him personally and reviewed by 2 independent attorneys, that gave him the right to flag any safety concern directly to the Federal Oversight Division without internal review. His hours were 7 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon, which meant he was home by 4 and could pick up Zoe from Robotics Club on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The Independent Safety Review Board held its first public session on a Thursday morning in April. It was not a large event, a conference room on the 3rd floor, about 60 people, folding chairs, bad coffee in cardboard cups. The agenda included a presentation on the new routing architecture, a demonstration of the emergency priority protocol, and a formal acknowledgement of the original system design. Elijah's name appeared on the presentation screen during the acknowledgement segment as lead architect of the foundational routing algorithm, with attribution retroactively corrected in the public record. It was the first time his name had appeared in any official North Star document in 10 years. He was sitting in the 3rd row. Zoe was next to him, still wearing her Robotics Club hoodie, holding the robotic arm she had finished 2 weeks earlier, a clean and functional piece of engineering with a reinforced pivot point and a redistributed weight bearing toward the elbow, exactly as her father had suggested. She had placed 3rd in the school science fair with it, which she considered a serious injustice, and had immediately begun designing the next iteration. When Elijah's name appeared on the screen, Zoe turned and looked at him. She did not say anything. She just looked at him, that particular look she had, the one that asked a question she never put into words. And this time, because the answer was finally available in the room, he held her gaze and gave her the smallest possible nod. She turned back to the screen. She did not make a production of it. Neither did he. In the back of the room, Diana Reeves stood against the wall with the other staff members who had not found seats. When the acknowledgement segment ended and the room began to applaud, she applauded with them, not leading it, not making herself visible, just one set of hands among many, in a room full of people who had shown up on an ordinary Thursday morning to do the work of making something better than it had been. Outside the window, the city was having one of its first genuinely warm days of the year. On the street below, a delivery driver was double parked with his hazard lights on, carrying something in an insulated case toward the hospital entrance half a block away, moving quickly, but not running, the practiced urgency of someone who understood exactly how much time he had and intended to use all of it.